All right. Welcome, everybody. Dr. Dickon Weatherby here for our fall 2014 enrollment of the Functional Blood Chemistry Analysis Training Program. This is our fourth and final Q&A coaching call. So it's going to give you a little bit of agenda what we're going to do. I want to talk about a few highlights from the software. I just made quite a big change in the software. So I wanted to take an opportunity to show that to you and kind of explain why. Then I'm going to go over a case study. This is where I like to do kind of before and after case studies where we talk about just sort of brief clinical findings that the patient's presenting with. Then we look at the standard lab test that comes back and see what a paltry amount of information it has in it. And then looking at it in the software, looking at it from the lens of the functional blood chemistry analysis and trying to marry up or match up what we're seeing in the blood with what this patient is sort of telling us initially. And so many times just the signs and symptoms that a patient is presenting with. That's why I really like functional signs and symptoms analysis, because it gives you an opportunity to go, oh, we're seeing your adrenals in some of these symptoms that you're having, and we're seeing sex hormone issues or blood sugar dysregulation issues in the blood, and we're also seeing that in your signs and symptoms. So this case study is going to do that. And then I've got quite a few questions to go through. So hopefully you'll find those helpful and enlightening. And if you have questions that you'd like me to answer live on the call, please go ahead and write the questions in that question section. And at the end of the call, I will, if there are any, I will go through them and do my very best to answer those. So let's jump into the software program right now. What I wanted to do is I made some changes to the way that the historical and comparative information in the software is being reported. The reason for this is I had a few emails from some of my heavy users. These are people that are doing, 1 to 200 cases a month. And a few of them got on the phone with me and said, really the way that the data is presented or are presented in the blood test results form and the blood test history is really counterintuitive to how we would like to be explaining it to our patients. And if there's one thing that we've had to sort of work with in our consultation times and questions that patients have is sort of how do we look at that historical report. So I'm just going to dive in here. I'm going to look at this case 12 here. This guy's got 3 blood test reports in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just look at a blood test results report and blood test history, and I'll kind of show you some of the changes that I made. So the changes really are around these 3 columns, the improvement column, the previous test, and the current test. Obviously, if you don't have any previous tests, and this is the very first test that you're doing in the system, then these 2 columns here will be blank and you'll just have the current test. But ultimately, any time that we're comparing information, we want to be able to demonstrate change. We want to be able to go, you were here and now you're here. And, unless you're, I guess, from a country that reads from right to left, it really makes sense to read that type of information from left to right. So the way that this is oriented right now is that it shows you very clearly whether or not there's been an improvement between the previous test and the current test. So we can very quickly go, oh, the glucose has improved because it was 89, a little bit high, and now it's gone down to 75. But concurrently, the hemoglobin A1C is not moving in the right direction, started at 4.95 and now is 4.3. And also, even though the fasting insulin is both red and above the optimum range, we can see that there is a slight improvement because the values are going down. We're going from 6.8 to 6.0. The BUN is gone up, so that's not improved. And so I think you can really sit down with your patient and go, listen, this is where we are right now, and this is where you've been, and this is kind of how we're wanting to move. And it's so very, very important to be able to communicate change. It's one of the reasons why patients want to come back and have their blood tested again, is so that we can show this type of information. I've done a fair number of interviews with some of my users, and I would say at least half of them, if not more than half, have said, the compliance about getting a patient to retest is almost doubled, tripled. Patients are actually coming in and almost demanding that they get their blood tested again because they want to see how their values have changed. And so by showing it in this way, improvement, previous tests and current tests, we can kind of show that trajectory towards where we're at, because ultimately we want to get them to a point where everything is improved. Everything here is in with the white background, meaning that it's in within the optimum range. And I think that this is a way that we can do that. Now, in the history reporting, we can also show change, and what we've done here is we put the most recent test of the previous 7. So if there were 7 tests, there would be 7 columns here, with the most recent one on the far right and the furthest away from present on the left. And again, we're wanting to see what is change as it's happening from a left to right, as our eyes are moving across the screen. And that's why we have this little infographic here too. This gray area marks the optimum range for this particular element. And so we can see that back in March 6th, 2012, this patient had a 91 glucose, not super duper high, maybe not diabetic high, but definitely higher than we would like to see it, trending towards those conditions. And so as we can see, a downward slope towards optimal means that we are trending towards optimum wellness in this particular element, which, as we know, is associated so strongly with blood sugar regulation. When I look at blood testing, and I've talked about this before, is like, obviously we get a snapshot of what's happening here in the present, but we also get a glimpse of where a patient could be going in the future, because we have an opportunity to go, if you don't make this correction, here's what potentially could happen for you. If you don't address the food that you're eating, the exercise that you may or may not be doing, smoking if you are or aren't smoking, alcohol consumption, exercise, lifestyle, diet, if you don't address those things now and make changes, then what we're going to see is this little infographic going completely the wrong direction. So we want to see these things dropping down into a state of optimal. Maybe they start all coming up into a state of optimal if they were very low. So that's kind of why I really like these infographics. I think very quickly they show kind of where we were and where we're going to, or where we are. Unfortunately, we can't, put a blood test in the future. It would be kind of cool, but we can't do that. So we can say to this patient, listen, back in March 6th, your glucose was 91. Not super high, but trending towards being too high. Then in June 2012, it went down to 89. And then somewhere between these intervening time period, it went down to 75, and that's almost gone too far. It's like, I don't like to see glucose too low, but that's a good trending move. That's an improvement. The hemoglobin A1C was started at 5.5, which is right at the top of optimal. 4.95, which means their long-term 3-month glucose control is pretty good. May mean that when this blood glucose was taken, they may have had, a couple of days or maybe a week of trending towards higher glucose, and maybe in their diet or their regulation at that particular time wasn't very good. But we can also see here that, and it's interesting, what we're seeing here is that their glucose is coming down to 75, which is just on the threshold of being a little bit too low. The hemoglobin A1C is coming down a little bit too low, and their fasting insulin is coming up. What we might be seeing here is actually a sort of a little bit of a shift away from just high glucose, but more in towards maybe a little bit of hyperinsulinemia. Again, not super drastic, because you have to remember that the standard range for fasting insulin can tolerate a high of about 19. So here we are at 6. It's not super high, but we would like to see that back here in this gray zone. So hopefully you can take this home with you and really start working on it. In some ways, patients that have had a lot of historical data in their chart, this is the place to start. This is the very first place to come in and work with your patients, because they want to see where they're moving. And then you can go back and go, okay, so let's take a look now where we are, the snapshot of the functional indexes and what the state of the various different systems of your body are. So that's why we made the changes. Hopefully you'll be able to use those with your clients and patients, and hopefully it will start making a little bit more intuitive sense. So let's jump now. I'm going to pull up a new patient case, and we're going to look at a female test case that is not test in terms of made up. It's actual real patient, but this is kind of my testing site where I put in cases that I want to go through. And so this is a female patient. She's 48 years old. And let's work off of, let's go generate a report here. I'll show you kind of the reports that I like to generate. I actually don't like to generate a product-specific report right away. I like to just do the blank health improvement, because what it does is it just basically lists the top 5 clinical conditions and the top 3 nutrient deficiencies. It gives you 8 areas that the software thinks should be priority for us to focus on. I want to look at the blood test results report. I'm not super interested in looking at percent deviation from optimal. Don't actually look at that much anymore, to be honest with you. Out of optimal range, I usually think is more as a sort of a patient report. Definitely interested in the functional index, the nutrient index, clinical dysfunctions, and recommend further testing. So while that's being pulled up, I want to go back here and look at this case. So we have a 48-year-old female. She presents to clinic feeling very run down and very stressed. She has a very stressful lifestyle. She works at a bank, and reported that within the last 2 or 3 months there's been some change in personnel, and not only is she working longer hours, but the new manager is expecting more productivity, and so she's really been feeling it. She's been gradually gaining weight over the last few years, still has her period, but it's not regular. She complains of shortness of breath, not sleeping very well. She says that she goes to sleep okay, but wakes up at about 3 or 4 in the morning and can't get back to sleep. So, you know, in that situation, one of the things that I like to do is to ask more specific questions about, is there light in your room? Is there an alarm clock right next door to you? Where do you keep your phone? Is it charging right next door to you? Make sure that there's no electromagnetic frequencies of any description. Are you using electric blankets or any type of electric devices within, you know, 3 to 4 foot radius of your head? I have a friend who does sick house studies, and he said, you know, it's amazing when he goes into a house with his special little wand that he measures interference and frequencies and stuff, how many people at their bed have a lot of electromagnetic activity. So anyway, a little bit of a side note, but anytime I see poor sleep, that's one of the things that I consider too. Also considering what did they eat prior to that, how much coffee are they consuming, when do they have their last caffeinated beverage, are they eating too late, are they having hyperglycemia type issues, especially when they're waking 3 or 4 in the morning. Maybe it's their glycogen storage issues. They can't release that glycogen, and the stress hormone is trying to come in and pick them back up again. She complained of asthma, worse in the spring and the fall. Classic allergy picture. Funnily enough, you know, that's when obviously everything's bursting into life at the spring. But the fall, there's a lot of tree pollens as well. Chronic constipation, telling me that there's probably GI issues going on. Can't remember exactly how many bowel movements she's having a week, but that's the question that you have to ask, because for some people, you know, they think that it's normal only to have 3 bowel movements a week. And so when they say they're chronically constipated, they may be having 1. I had a patient once that was, you know, going to the bathroom once a week, and that is just not right. And generally having low energy. So let's just take a quick look at what came back from the lab. So you would expect this type of case, there's a lot going on here. And the expectation would be that if you're going to see your primary care physician and you're feeling like she is, that you know, you have to wonder what's going on. I mean, there's got to be some issues in her self-regulatory systems that are causing her to feel this way. Obviously, we can pull back from a functional medicine perspective and go, what's happening in her diet over the last months, days, weeks, months, years that have contributed to her feeling this way. Is she eating foods that she's allergic to? Is she gluten sensitive and all that kind of stuff? What's her mental and emotional life like? Because, that plays such a strong role in how we are experiencing the world and how we're dealing with issues of the world. She talked about her job experience and how that's pretty stressful for her. But she goes to the medical doctor and she gets this back. And I think one of the first things to remember is that an allopathic physician is going to be looking at this through a lens of, is there pathology? Is there disease, actual disease states? Is the tissue change? Are the cellular changes that are manifesting and causing various different systems represented on this panel to be out of balance? They're not really looking at it through the lens of, is there something that's not working well right now, that if we fix it right now, we can prevent a disease from occurring. And as we'll see when we go into the functional report, there's lots and lots going on with this patient, but ultimately, from an allopathic medical perspective, they don't really have anything that they can do to treat it. If you think about the ways that allopathic medicine treats disease and illness, it's all about controlling the body, shutting processes down in the body, and you just have to look at the categories of pharmaceutical medicines to know that it's about blocking and it's about anti. It's antibiotics, antidepressants, anti-anxiety, painkillers, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, you name it, anti-blood sugar, anti-glucose, those types of things. So from our functional perspective, we're trying to look at this through a slightly different lens. So let's just kind of, first of all, put on our primary care medical doctor and allopathic medical doctor hat. So they would say, well, let's look at the lipid panel. Everything's looking really good. You're able to regulate cholesterol well. That's really good. Homocysteine looks fine, so there's no, cardiovascular problems happening here. Glucose is looking really good, right where you should be. The kidneys are operating well. Your BUN, the creatinine, is all good. BUN ratio is fine. Your electrolytes, sodium, potassium, chloride, and carbon dioxide, are all wonderful. Your minerals, calcium is looking good. Your blood proteins, absolutely fine. Your gallbladder's looking good. Your bilirubin levels are just fine. And your liver enzymes, well, you're a little bit high here on the ALT, so nothing super high, but something probably worth paying attention to. So they don't have anything that they can do with this. What they might try and do is find out why, but what we know is that the number one cause of elevated liver enzymes is what they call non-alcoholic steatotic hepatitis. And so that really kind of tells you what the issue is. Non-alcoholic means it's not being induced by alcohol consumption. Steatotic means it's about fat. And hepatitis means there's inflammation in the liver. So yes, the liver is inflamed. So why is the liver inflamed? There's liver dysfunction happening here. I like to look at things through a lens of multiple patterns pointing towards something, but definitely this is something to pay attention to. Hemoglobin A1C is 5.2, that's perfectly fine. Again, I'm speaking from the allopathic physician's perspective. Magnesium's good, phosphates, so your minerals are all good, uric acid's great. Bilirubin, your direct bilirubin is fine. LDH, GGT, thyroid's looking great. All your thyroid hormones, the thyroid regulation's really good. And your immune system's good. There's no signs of anemia. Everything looks pretty darn good as far as I can tell. So the blood's not really telling me very much. And so she probably walked out of that appointment. Again, this is probably not a blood test that's been run by an allopathic medical doctor because it's too comprehensive. But she probably walked out of this appointment, if this had been the test, feeling like maybe there's something in her head because there's nothing that can really explain what's going on. So there might be a few little notes on here. You know, they might have scribbled some information about, that we need to track this or follow it. But really, that's the only thing that's out of range on this report is the ALT is a little bit high. So a lot of information has been collected, but not a lot of meaning has been taken from that. So she then comes to see us, and we do a comprehensive functional medicine approach. We run it through software, and we are now going to see whether or not we're going to be able to pick up some interesting information. You know, the health improvement plan is important to look at, obviously, because it tells you the top things. So I'm just going to stop looking at that. So remember, there was only one element outside of the standard range. But when we look at it through our lens, we can see there's actually quite a lot going on. We see actually that the glucose is a little bit lower than we would like it. And this is actually not a good sign. I don't like seeing low glucose because it means that the blood sugar regulatory mechanisms are not functioning well. If you've gone through any of my training modules on blood sugar regulation, you know I talk about the steps or the road to diabetes. And that moment when the blood glucose starts to drop like this is the patient taking that very, very first step. It's the reactive hyperglycemic step. We've lost our ability to regulate the sugars that we're consuming. So what ends up happening is whenever we have a meal that might be too rich in carbohydrate, it causes a concomitant release of insulin that is designed to drive the glucose into the cells and bring the blood glucose levels down. And if regulation was happening, the amount of insulin being released in order to do that job would be sufficient. But what happens in this particular case, and unfortunately we don't have insulin to measure here, but insulin is released and it actually does too good a job. It pushes too much glucose into the cell. Now, is that because the body's producing too much insulin? Is the signaling not working correctly? But ultimately what ends up happening is the glucose goes into the cell, and the patient, if you look at this over a period of time, if you're measuring their glucose over time, their glucose actually starts to drop below what it would be if it was fasting. And that's when we get that reactive hyperglycemic trigger. We start to feel lightheaded, we start to get woozy, we may get dizzy when we stand up, we're hungry, and we need to feed, and we need fuel right now. Not saying that that's necessarily what's going on, but that whenever I see a low glucose like that, that's kind of what's running through my head. BUN creatinine ratio is a little bit high. Let's say, we wanted to know a little bit more about what a high BUN creatinine ratio is, so we click this. That's why I love the software. It tells us about what's happening. So renal disease is the finding here, but we're not really seeing that because the BUN and the creatinine themselves are within normal range. We have low potassium and we have a high sodium-potassium ratio. This is a really, really important functional medicine ratio to pay attention to. And so when we look at that, basically tells there are two things that could be causing the sodium-potassium ratio to be off: acute stress or inflammation, or both. So we know that when the potassium levels are low, we're looking at adrenal stress as a potential cause of that potassium. So we know that something's happening here in the adrenals. Not seeing very much here. So, uric acid, another inflammatory marker, anion gap telling us about B complex, all of these telling us a little bit about acid-base balance, albumin telling us about the liver, proteins and globulins and albumins together tell us a little bit about what's happening on the GI. We know that she has an increased phosphorus and her calcium-phosphorus ratio is depleted. So low calcium-phosphorus ratio, so indicative of decreased calcium and increased phosphorus. Well, what was probably causing this was the phosphorus was increased. It's a hyperchlorhydria marker as well. So even though we're not seeing that here in the proteins, it's kind of like a chalking up of a little column associated with hyperchlorhydria. Magnesium, not my favorite way to measure magnesium, but a lot of labs are doing that, so why not just throw it in there? Probably costs about $1, and if it's out of range, it becomes significant. Alkaline phosphatase, a low alkaline phosphatase is, remember, alkaline phosphatase is a zinc-dependent enzyme, and so low alkaline phosphatase is indicative of zinc. So I would say probably that this person is zinc deficient. ALT we noticed was elevated, so if we click this, here are some of the issues. Dysfunction located inside the liver itself, fatty liver, liver dysfunction, biliary tract obstruction, liver infection. Obviously these ones down here on the list are much more indicative of a very grossly elevated ALT. 35 is too high, but you know, I like to see that below 35. LDH, interestingly enough, if that had been low, that would have been suggestive of a reactive hypoglycemia, but somehow she's able to regulate that. Fine regulation in the gallbladder. Her iron levels are elevated, ferritin levels are elevated. Elevated ferritin is an inflammatory marker here. Percent transferrin saturation is elevated. Let's take a look at that. That's a hemochromatosis or iron overload. Quite uncommon in females, so I'm kind of curious about that. Even though the blood test report reported that her cholesterol levels were fine, oftentimes you do see the split between cholesterol levels going up and triglyceride levels going down, potentially a dietary thing to take a look at. What are low triglycerides associated with? Liver biliary dysfunction, a diet that's insufficient in fat, usually vegetarian diets, thyroid hyperfunction or an autoimmune process. This is a very, very specific pattern here, so make sure that when you are looking at this, that you're not just jumping, oh, their triglycerides are low, therefore they've got an autoimmune process. No, it has to be with a lower normal cholesterol and an increased HDL. So that's a very, very specific pattern there, and we're not seeing that in this particular case. We also noticed that back on the regular blood test that looked like her thyroid levels were good. What we're seeing here when we look through the functional lens, we're seeing that her TSH is a little bit elevated at 2.85. I like to see it below 2. So this is indicative of kind of a primary hypothyroidism beginning to emerge. Why wait until it's actually in your face? Why not try and do something right now? Total T3 basically saying that, you know, the levels of T3 that are free and bound and circulating is low, therefore not much available to actually do metabolic energy and metabolic work. It'd be really nice to do a free T3 to kind of see how much of this total is actually available for metabolic activity. Homocysteine's a little bit elevated at 8.6. I like to see it below 7.2. Again, this is a marker of inflammation. Homocysteine is a metabolic waste and can cause damage to arteries and that type of thing. Another thing to notice here on the blood test is that her hormone panels were all completely normal, and yet we see that her DHEA actually is quite low at 80 and testosterone female at 25. So this could be indicative of the adrenal stress. Whenever cortisol levels go up, typically DHEA levels go in the opposite direction. Might be a good idea to do an adrenal stress index to find out exactly what's happening with that salivary DHEA, and then looking at that cortisol over a 12 to 18 hour period. So I would think that that would probably be a good thing to do with this particular patient. And there's definitely some stuff going on in her white blood cell count. This is an immune insufficiency type of issue here, whether or not there's an infection going on, actually active or chronic. But the monocytes being elevated tells me that there's probably something that's happened in the past that the body's trying to deal with. MCV is a little bit elevated, 93.3. That to me is a B12 deficiency marker. And she is anemic. So, you know, that was not right. I mean, she's not clinically, diagnosably anemic, but she's trending towards it. So why wait? Let's find out what kind of an anemia and start to make recommendations. Functional index report, this is what the patient would get, and it kind of tells them sort of a state of the union of various different systems in her body. Starting here at the allergy index, well, this is not surprising given she did report that every fall and every spring she got asthma, and I think if we were to ask more questions about that, you'd probably find that she actually has pretty severe seasonal allergies. Red blood cell index tells me that there's an anemia happening. Adrenal function index, either an adrenal stress or adrenal insufficiency. Either one, it's too much. Thyroid function index indicating that there's some issues in the thyroid, and she's having some regulation issues in the sex hormones, and also her blood sugar regulation is not that good. The immune function is a little bit lower than that, 47%. But typically I like to take a look at anything above 50 as being, something to take a look and pay attention to. Again, if you're not familiar with reading these, the index tells you a little bit about what the index is, how the software is coming up with this conclusion. There's an 80% likelihood. And then moving on down tells you what the findings on the blood test. So for a red blood cell index, the red blood cells were low, hemoglobin was low, hematocrit was low, and the MCV was high. These are all signs of red blood cell indications of something going on in that system. Nutrient index, nothing really equivocal here. I know that there are probably individual nutrients that are going to be out of balance, but collectively there's not enough to really show that there's real need for vitamin support. So let's go take a look at the individual nutrients. And sure enough, the things that we talked about, DHEA was very low. I think there's definitely a need to do supplementation with that. I'm not a big fan on high dosage supplementation of DHEA. I like to do smaller dosage. But the zinc as well, and vitamin B12 and folate are definitely things that we would want to pay attention to. Recommended further testing report here. Given that the eosinophils were elevated and that there was this low hemoglobin, hematocrit, and the monocytes were elevated, these are all pointing towards intestinal parasites. I'm not sure whether that's really something that we should necessarily pay attention to with this patient, but it's always worth asking the questions. Have you been traveling? Have you been camping? Have you been drinking water out of rivers or gone swimming in lakes and that type of thing? It is amazing to me how prevalent these are, even in rural urban areas. Allergies, pretty sure that this is seasonal allergies, so I'm not sure whether we need to do food sensitivities and stuff, but she's had that constipation for a long time and there's definitely some issues going on, so probably allergies might be worth doing a food sensitivity panel. Zinc deficiency I like to treat presumptively, but you can do the N-alpha zinc taste test just to kind of check things out. Also, look at their nails, ask some questions about the reduced sense of smell or taste. Are they having cuts that are slow to heal? Are they having adult acne? Do they have increased susceptibility to colds, infections, and flu? I definitely think that zinc would be a good thing for this person to be on. Primary hypothyroidism, yeah, the high TSH, low total T3, definitely something to pay attention to, but it wasn't super elevated, so I'm not necessarily worried about jumping straight to do thyroid antibody panels. That's just me. If it was you and you felt like you wanted to do that, then go ahead. I actually think that the adrenal stress is probably having a strong impact on the thyroid itself. And this is the adrenal dysfunction. This is where it talks about doing the adrenal salivary test. Actually, it looks like I didn't do a clinical dysfunctions report. So let me just quickly jump into that. I'll go order one of those. Be back in a second. There we go. That's why I love this software. You can just move around and just, get whatever reports you want, print off whatever reports you want. So sure enough, remember the top things on the adrenal, on the functional index were the red blood cell, thyroid index was out of balance, the adrenal index was out of balance. Intestinal parasites are really high because, like we said, these are the findings. We're all out of balance. So yeah, maybe we should be paying attention to this. But there's an anemia, probably a B12 deficiency anemia. There's a little bit of an iron overload. Not super sure what's happening on that level. Probably wouldn't want to do a little bit more research on that. Definitely some blood sugar issues, hyperglycemia, and the adrenal stress. I think that should probably be a little bit higher. But let's go see what the rationale here. Yeah, there's just a lot of things that we look at with adrenal stress, and the BUM is normal, the chloride is normal, the CO2 is normal, the cholesterol was a little bit out of balance, but not in the right direction, and the triglycerides. So hopefully, by looking at it through this lens, you're really able to talk to them about what's happening on a sort of systemic level. These different organ systems and how they interrelate and how they connect with one another, and you can actually have a very meaningful conversation. You put together a very nice little report for them, either put it into a vinyl binder or staple it or at least print it in color for them. And they actually get to walk away with this thing, and it provides a lot of meaning for them. And they bring it back in when they have their blood test redrawn, because ultimately, you want to see this change. All right, let's jump into answering some questions here. These are questions that I've gotten over the last couple of months, and so I want to go in to answer those. Why don't I just blow this up full screen? Hopefully you guys can see that a bit better. There we go. So I can't seem to find where on the software to schedule a future test for one of my current patients. I keep clicking everywhere and cannot find the right button to do that. Please help. One of the things that we built into the software was this ability to be able to schedule blood tests. Now you ask yourself, why on earth would I want to do that? Well, remember when you see a patient and doing a consult and they've given you a blood test, you want to be able to see whether or not there's been change. And the only way to do that is to get another blood test. So we built in a way for you to be able to do that. So let's say that patient just came in. That was patient, let's do the one that we saw before, the FBCA 12. John Doe here. So the last consult that we did with him, let's say we just did that today, March 18th, 2015. And let's say I wanted to have in the system a reminder for him to do a blood test in 5 weeks. So what we do is we hit Add New Blood Test. And then we put in what date do we want to have this test. So let's say we want him to do it May 1st. And I want to do the default male panel conventional. And I want to save scheduled lab test. I also did a nice little video of this. So what you see now is we have a scheduled lab test for this guy, May 1st, 2015. And with any luck, it'll appear on the dashboard. There it is. So let's say come May 15th. And let's say actually, let's project ourselves into the future. And let's say we're here in June and you come in and you go, oh, no, John Doe's blood test is overdue. You can call the front desk and go, we need to have John Doe back in again to do a blood test. Can you contact him and get him a requisition form? When that blood test comes back, you just hit this Add Lab Test Results button, and it automatically jumps to here, and it's saying you have a scheduled lab test. You're about to actually fulfill that scheduled test. And so that's kind of how we do it. All right, let's go down here. I get quite a few patients coming in with blood work from their primary care physicians, and there are often very, very few elements on these panels compared to what you recommend. How do I use the software? This is a really good question, and I get it quite a lot too. And I know that there are practitioners out there who may not have the ability because of their state licensing to order blood tests, so they're relying on the blood tests gotten back from their patients. And so many times they don't have enough information on them. So my recommendation is not to give them the functional index reports, but use them for your own research and then just present to them the blood test results report. So basically this is the report that I used to have when I was doing the work manually. The only report that I would have was something similar to this. Remember, this is what I did with this particular case, was go through this and telling you what I'm seeing. But give them this, and you'll be able to see how short it is. You can also do the blood test history report. And the reason I like to do this one is that it actually lists every single element in the system and shows you where the blanks are. So for instance, if you only had maybe 30% of what you're seeing here, there will be lots and lots of blanks. So by showing them the blood test results report, you can actually steer the conversation. And unfortunately, with a number of elements missing, the system is going to underreport what's happening because there's an uncertainty element built in here. You can also show them a blood test results report from one of your comprehensive panels and show them the difference, and maybe show them the index report on that case too. So you may want to have a sample case and go, listen, if you were to do the blood test through me, and I know it's going to cost you a little bit out of pocket, but the amount of information I'm going to be able to share with you is going to be astronomical compared to what we can get from this simple test that you got from your physician. You know, it's like I liken it to go into your local garage to get your oil changed, and they change the oil filter, check the windshield wipers and tire pressure, and that's all they do. And you compare that to going to, you know, Oil Can Henry or Chevron or whatever, you know, those big oil stops are, and they give you like a 46-point check where they check all the systems of the car and give you a nice printout. I mean, I'm sure many of you have had that done. It can be a little overwhelming at times because they're basically trying to sell you on new air filters and all of that kind of stuff. And they come and show you stuff from your car and go, this is your air filter. When was the last time it was changed? And you look at it and it's just full of dead moths and things like that. But and I'm kind of getting off track here a little bit, but ultimately that's the difference. You know, when the medical doctor or the allopathic physician has ordered this panel, it's basically like just getting your oil changed, your tire pressure checked, as opposed to going to one of these places where they do a full checkup for you. I had a question about marketing the software. How do you sell it to your patients? This couldn't be a more timely question because next Wednesday, March 25th, I'm hosting a free blood chemistry training with Dr. Melissa Grill-Peterson. And she's going to be teaching a webinar entitled Maximizing Your Clinical Income with Functional Blood Chemistry Analysis. And I'm sure she's going to basically be doing a 45-minute presentation on exactly this particular topic. So if you're interested in that, I will be getting an email out tonight or tomorrow morning, and you can sign up for that. But ultimately, the way that I've kind of looked at it is that practitioners are marketing the software in many different ways. And I think any time that you think about marketing, it has to start with learning how to sell a blood test to your patient. You have to communicate value. So communicate the value of blood testing to your patients, why it's that important. Communicate the benefits of the blood test to them, and really knowing and maybe even showing them as that sample blood test. You said, this is the report that we get. Maybe show them one that comes back from the lab with everything crossed out. This is what you're going to get from your doctor, and this is like going to your local garage and getting your oil and your windshield wipers changed. And this is like going to the oil stop where they do a 64-point check on your body. That's what we're doing here. We're doing a 78-point check on various different systems of the body. Get them to walk out having paid for the lab test itself, not just with the requisition and then they pay for it. When someone has paid for something, they are going to value it a lot more highly. Now that requisition form is worth $150. Give them a discount for paying up front, whatever you want to do, but make sure that they walk out having paid for that blood test. Then you're going to interpret the results, and hint, hint, you want to use the software. It's the best way to do it. Then you want to communicate those results with the patient, making sure you relate it back to what it is that they came to you for. What are their complaints or what are their symptoms? You have to relate it back to that. Because if you start going off on a tangent about all the things that you want to start treating, and it's got nothing to do with what they actually came to you for, you're going to lose them. And we are educators. In terms of the money side of it, I'm going to leave that up to Melissa to go over that for us, because there are many different ways that you can charge for these types of services. Next question here. I was hoping you could help me understand how to convert neutrophils lymphocytes from 10(9/L) measurement to percentage. Okay, I answer this question so many times. I love it because it means that people are really looking. So let's go over the answer to this one. What you're looking at here is the results are being reported in what we call absolute measurements. So we have the total white blood cell count is an absolute count. And then we have percentages that's saying of that absolute count, you have 52% of those cells are neutrophils, 36% of them are lymphocytes, and da-da-da-da. So what we have to do is be able to do a reverse calculations. So for the sake of demonstration, let's say that the total white blood cell count is 4.5. And we know that the absolute count for neutrophils is 2.5. So what percent of the total white blood cell count is made up of neutrophils? Well, we do 2.5 divided by 4.5 and multiply that by 100, and the answer is 55.56%. So basically you take the results of the neutrophil absolute count divided by the total blood cell count, multiply that answer by 100, and that has your percentage. Can you help me to understand why TIBC would be low and serum iron high in iron deficiency anemia? Well, good question, but in actual fact, in iron deficiency of anemia, the TIBC is going to be high and the serum iron low. I like to approach questions like this by thinking about the individual elements themselves. You know, I did a short video talking about the 3 things you have to consider when looking at individual elements that are high or low. So I just kind of want to run through very quickly what that process is. So the first question is, where does this element come from? The second is, why would it be elevated? And the third, why would it be decreased? So let's take a look at TIBC through that particular lens. So what does TIBC stand for? Total iron binding capacity. So what the heck does that mean? Well, total iron binding capacity is an approximate estimation of the serum transferrin level. So what's transferrin? Well, transferrin is the protein that carries the majority of iron in the blood. TIBC is not an exact measurement of transferrin because not all of the iron is bound. The test is performed by saturating the serum with excess iron. This saturates the transferrin present in the sample, and from this reading we can estimate the capacity for the transferrin to bind iron. All of the iron not bound to the protein is removed and the serum iron is measured, and we get the TIBC measurement. Long-winded answer. So in the face of iron deficiency anemia, the body reacts to lack of serum iron by either increasing the amount of transferrin or increasing the binding capacity of the existing transferrin in an effort to get more iron distributed to the bone marrow. Pretty neat process if you think about it, how the body's using carrier proteins to that effect. So the analogy that I would use is a little like the increase we see in red blood cells with respiratory distress. So there's not enough oxygen coming into the lungs, so let's increase the number of pickup vehicles or red blood cells to make sure that we get as much of the not available oxygen carried around in the body. So this would explain why in the case of hemochromatosis, excess iron, the TIBC will be low, since the body will either decrease the amount of serum transferrin or decrease the binding capacity in an effort to prevent excess iron from being transported to the tissues. I do want to point out this chart. This is from my book. So if you have a copy of my book, I think it's page 173, basically compares serum iron, TIBC, and percent transferrin saturation in terms of up and down arrows and telling you what the clinical implications are. When I said that iron deficiency anemia, where is that? Chronic iron deficiency anemia, yep, your serum iron is going to be low, TIBC will be normal, and your percent transferrin saturation will be decreased. So this is a nice little book, or a nice little chart to have around. Okay, can you help me understand why direct bilirubin would be increased in liver dysfunction? Well, it's an important thing to grasp. When we're talking about bilirubin, total bilirubin is composed of the direct or the indirect form. So the direct bilirubin is the form of bilirubin that has been through the liver and conjugated by the hepatocytes. In the process of conjugation, it's basically turning bilirubin and making it water-soluble so that it can be excreted in the urine or in the digestive tract. And also it can be incorporated into bile, excreted via the gallbladder and the biliary tree, and that's very, very important. In order for the bilirubin to be in the bile, it has to be water-soluble. So there are a number of reasons. Why direct bilirubin can be elevated, and they all involve some form of blockage. The most obvious point of blockage are in the biliary tree itself, so that's the common bile duct and the gallbladder. However, there are quite a few disease processes and dysfunctions that can cause what is called intrahepatic obstruction, i.e. obstruction within the hepatocytes themselves in the liver. So conditions that can cause damage to the liver involve, alcohol-induced injuries, fatty liver, non-alcoholic steatotic hepatitis, the one that we talked about with that patient with the increased ALT, viral hepatitis, Epstein-Barr, infectious mononucleosis, etc. These can all cause obstructions in the small biliary channels that create the site of liver dysfunction. Serum bilirubin levels will be elevated along with both conjugated and unconjugated fractions. So the indirect bilirubin is the bilirubin that's come straight from the body into the liver and is non-water soluble. Our blood reports in the UK are showing hemoglobin A1C in millimoles per mole, and I'm not sure how to convert this into the units of the software. I found this pretty cool little site here, so I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So this is how you would change basically the millimole readings and how to convert them into percentages. And then once you've got the percentage, you can then use a conversion factor to put it into the units in standard international units. So basically you would say, okay, so this patient came back with 43 or 44. Let's say that would account for maybe 6.2. I put 6.2 into my conversion tool. Let's go over there and take a look. So I'm going to convert hemoglobin A1C, and I don't want to do 6.2, and I want to convert it into standard international units, and that's going to be 0.06. So that's what you would put into the software right there in standard international unit land. The term conjugated and unconjugated bilirubin, is this the same as direct and indirect bilirubin? Yep. Direct bilirubin is conjugated, indirect is unconjugated. We see urea referred to in results from tests here. Is this the same as uric acid in the software? No, it's not. It is not uric acid. It is blood urea nitrogen, or BUN. And last question here is, how do I change the date on a lab entry already entered into the software? I do get quite a few questions on people asking, how do I edit the blood test result that's already in the system? So I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first thing you do is you view your patient list. You select the patient that you want to work with. And this will bring up the patient dashboard. And then down here, you can see all of the blood tests that are being put into the system. You can either generate reports from here for that particular lab test, or you can edit the results. So let's say I actually wanted to edit this one. And then I want to hit edit here. And now I can make changes to the date. I can change the lab profile. Let's say I want to change the date to the 3rd. Save that. Now this particular test is shows the 3rd. So everywhere where that test is reported, here in the history report is April 3rd. Also, these hyperlinks are pretty cool. If you just want to look at a blood test result report or a report from that particular blood test, that's kind of why we put these in there. Is there are hyperlinks, and I'm kind of straying off the point. I just want to show you some of the cool features that we've got here. You can actually jump in and just do reports right off itself. You can go, oh, I want to look at the blood test results report, or I want to generate a report on that particular test, or I want to look at the latest nutrient index snapshot. Well, everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. We've been at it for about an hour. My brain's starting to hurt. So appreciate you being with me for this, and look forward to doing another one of these in the near future. So enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks very much. For those of you that are kind of in the training program, if you know of any practitioners that might be interested, we're doing an enrollment for the spring 2015 training. Send them over to bloodchemistrytraining.com. If you've gotten value out of it, I know that it's a very valuable system of diagnosing, so I'd appreciate any referrals that you have. All right, everybody, thanks so much. Bye-bye.